A phone call between the US and Russian leaders has failed to ease tensions over Ukraine. Presidents Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin spoke after the US warned that Russia could invade Ukraine at any time. Moscow has dismissed that claim as hysteria. Ukraine's forces are on high alert as more than 100,000 Russian troops are gathered near the border. Germany has joined other countries in telling its nationals to leave Ukraine.
A show of unity in Ukraine's capital. The brave faces here, though, belie growing fears about a Russian attack on their country. Are we afraid? Probably, yes. I feel the anxiety inside me. Others are already plotting their escape.
We will try to wheel or pull back for full tank of gasoline and to prepare all documents in one box.
And making plans for their children too.
We are going to hide them in the countryside.
Ukrainian forces training near the Black Sea. These urban warfare exercises hint at the kind of unrest they're preparing for. President Zelenskyy, however, called for calm heads to prevail.
The best friend for enemies, that is panic in our country. And all this information that helps only for panic doesn't help us.
During an hour-long phone call on Saturday, US President Joe Biden warned Vladimir Putin of swift and severe costs if Russia does invade. Putin's team accused the US of unprecedented hysteria. The US's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, also spoke with his Russian counterpart.
On our call, Foreign Minister Lavrov said that Russians are working on a response to the paper that we sent to Moscow more than 2 weeks ago, proposing concrete areas for discussion. It remains to be seen if they'll follow through on that, but if they do, we'll be ready to engage.
On Sunday, contingency plans turned real. US staff at the Organisation for Security and Economic Cooperation, based in the rebel-held city of Donetsk, were packing up and heading home. Just the latest group to decide that the risk of all-out war is now too great.
Well, let's bring in Rajan Menon. He is an expert on defence policy and a senior researcher at Columbia University in New York. It's great to have you with us on DW News. Now, is this a bad sign that Western nations are calling on personnel and citizens to leave Ukraine?
Given the magnitude of the Russian buildup, they're doing the responsible thing. As you have said in your program, there is a very substantial buildup of Russian troops. The Russians are in a position to launch an assault if they wanted to. What is not known and what cannot be known is precisely when that will happen. And that is why these evacuations are taking place.
Now, Biden and Putin spoke, but there was clearly no breakthrough. Biden has said that he still prefers diplomacy. How do you think he should be navigating this to de-escalate a crisis?
Putin's main complaint has been that Russia's demands have been ignored. The problem with those demands is, one, that there should be a permanent ban on Ukraine entering NATO, which NATO is not prepared to give. And the other is that no U.S. forces should be introduced into those countries that joined NATO after 1999. The question is whether, in order to avert a war, Mr. Putin will reduce his demands somewhat and NATO will shift toward meeting them. I can see some ways that could happen, but there is no evidence that that's happening yet.
Now, yeah, Russia's main demand is that Ukraine never becomes a member of NATO. Is that ever going to be solvable?
Well, it is solvable in the following sense. I think Mr. Putin ought to realize, and certainly knows, that there's no country in NATO champing at the bit, insisting that Ukraine enter. Even the Ukrainians know this. So one possible solution that a colleague of I have suggested here in the U.S. is some sort of moratorium on membership. Whether Mr. Putin will settle for something like that, as opposed to a formal written guarantee, which he will not get, is the unknown question.
Now, you've criticised America's foreign policy after the end of the Cold War for excluding Russia from Europe's security architecture. What approach do you think the United States should be taking?
Well, the horse is kind of out of the barn now, but at the end of the Cold War, the United States faced a choice of expanding NATO eastward, which every single Russian leader, it's not just Mr. Putin, has said would be viewed as an unfriendly act and would divide Europe. As long as Russia was weak, this policy could be continued. We are dealing today with a substantially more powerful Russia. It is in a position to push back, and it has pushed back. None of this is to say that an attack on Ukraine would in any sense be legitimate. But I'm not surprised to see something like this having eventually happened.
Rajan Menon speaking to us from New York. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Well, let's go to Ukraine now. Matthias Böllinger is DW's bureau chief in Kyiv. Matthias, hi there. How concerned are ordinary Ukrainians about a possible war?
If somebody dropped you yesterday or today into the center of Kyiv, you wouldn't think at all, and not telling you where you are, you wouldn't think at all that you are in a country threatened by war. People are out on the streets, they are enjoying their life. You see street musicians, people doing their shopping. It's a beautiful day. But of course, people are concerned, and many people have done some preparations. Some people have withdrawn an amount of money to be safe for anything happening. And some people have been stockpiling fuel or food. People have thought about what they will do, whether they will, for example, go to their countryside house, their summer house, or whether they might even flee the country. So people are, of course, concerned, but this does not mean that people are sitting there scared, panicking. You don't see panic buying of groceries, and even the currency exchange is still stable, although the government has to support it.
Now, speaking of panic, President Zelenskyy is saying that is his country's biggest enemy right now. So does Zelenskyy not share the US assessment that an invasion could happen within days?
Yeah, he has been saying this for some weeks now, that he's unhappy with the communication by the US and other Western partners about all these detailed or very specific scenarios that they are giving. There has been also some speculation about why they are doing this. It's the first time a crisis is communicated this way, and he feels that this is making his job to keep the country together and to keep the economy together. Is making it more difficult because, of course, if capital flees the country, which is already happening, the country will be weaker in the case that something happens. However, he does not say he has an entirely different assessment of the situation. He says he has no detail, does not know about any detailed plans of an incursion, but he sees, of course, the threat, and he also sees the same military picture around his country that the Western allies see.
Matthias Böllinger in Kyiv. Thank you, Matthias. DW's Washington bureau chief Ines Pohl has this assessment.
We hear that the rhetoric has basically not changed, and that President Joe Biden repeated the message he has sent out before. He warned Putin that an Ukraine attack would bring, and I quote that here, a swift and decisive response. He said that in case of an invasion, Russia would be hit very hard by sanctions which also would target specifically the oligarchs and also Putin's personal assets. So today's phone call was another sign that President Biden is willing to play hardball.
And at the same time, Ines, we've heard Russia accuse the United States and also other Western countries of spreading what it calls disinformation, and it says it's not planning to invade Ukraine. But U.S. security officials had other assessments of that. What have they been saying?
Well, the first victim of a war or a military uploaded conflict is always the truth. So this definitely is also an info war. So we got information from both sides, and they definitely, both sides want to shape kind of the political discourse. But we see pictures and we have information from many different services that President Putin is increasing the number of military around the Ukrainian border. other. And as we just heard from Secretary of State Blinken, the possibility is or seems to be very real that an invasion might happen every day now.
Well, we also know that Putin spoke on the phone to the French President, Emmanuel Macron, today. When we're looking at the sort of high-stakes diplomacy going on, how important are talks with European leaders for Russia compared to these talks with the U.S.?
Well, you know, if these two people, if President Biden and President Putin meet, the most powerful military countries sit on a table. And I think we all agree on that there is always hope as long as people talk with each other, they don't shoot at each other. Having that said, this whole diplomacy here is very, very closely coordinated. European leaders, Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz included, seem to take a little bit of a different stand than President Biden. I think it's fair to say that Biden is playing a little bit of a bad cop here. And Scholz, who is traveling to Moscow on Tuesday, and Emmanuel Macron, the president from France, are rather trying to keep the diplomatic channels open. So I think every single telephone call, every single meeting with President Putin matters. But again, no doubt, if Joe Biden and Putin talk with each other, the most powerful military forces are sitting at one table, or at least talking at the same time with each other.
DW's Ines Pohl reporting for us from Washington. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.